Hello, I'm just about to do another order of these iomixer boards from JLCPCB, and I had a few people expressing interest in doing this themselves, but some of them weren't quite sure exactly what they needed to do. So I thought I might turn my screen capture thingy on here and just record myself doing this, and maybe I'll be able to clear that up for people who also want to do this. So you'll need to have an account on JLCPCB, and I've logged in already there, as you can see. And we're going to make a two-layer board, which is going to be done here, but I'll just show you first the files that we need to upload to the site to get that done. So that's these three files here. We have a zip file and then two CSV files, which are just text files really. So let's have a look at the text files first. This one called BOM is a bill of materials, and that just describes which parts we need, which components we want to put on the board, and how many of each of them. So let's have a look at the contents of that file, just a text file, and you can see the column headers at the top there. So let's just look at one part and follow it through, because this is referenced by the next file that we're going to look at. So let's look at this one here. We've got 10 microfarad capacitor, and this is going to be, it looks like we've got three of those, and they are going to be named C16, C20 and C22 on the board. And this is saying that we're going to buy them from LCSC, and that's LCSC's part number. The next file, this pick and place one, is also just a text file, and this describes where each one of those things needs to be placed on the board, and the angle or the rotation that it needs to be placed at. So if we look at the one that we were looking at before, was it C12? I've already forgotten. Wow. Let's say it was this one, C12. So this mil, I think, is 1/1000th of an inch. So it's just giving the coordinates where that needs to be placed, and then this 90 degrees is a rotation, which is probably going to be a multiple of 90 degrees, because on the iomixer, if we just have a look over here, all of our parts are at 90 degrees, or 180 or 270. There's no diagonal ones on this particular revision. So I'm making revision 1.2 of the board at the moment. In future, this might change to some other revision, but just getting back to our third file that we had, this zip file. If I just have a look in here, you don't really need to look into these or know much about them to get this done. I just thought I'd give a little introduction so that people know a little bit more about what's happening. So if we look in this file, we have a whole bunch of layer information. So we've got something layer, and I think these are some sort of a vector graphics format which describes each layer on the board. So if we go back to that board here, that's these ones here. So we've got top silk layer, bottom silk layer, top paste mask. And if I just turn one of these off, I'll just turn the yellow one off so you can sort of see there's a whole lot of different layers that are involved in making up this board description. So that's what this zip file is here, and we're going to need to upload each one of these to the website as we go. So let's get back to the website, and we will click on here, quote now for 1 and 2 layers, and just a minute, come on. Alright, so we've got here add Gerber file. So I'm going to click on here, and I'll find that Gerber file that we were just looking at, and we'll upload that. And it takes a little bit of time to figure out that, but when this step here is done, it should show us a picture of the board as it should look, and it says success, this file has been saved to your file manager. And then there's a whole lot of options here. I typically don't really bother changing any of these except for this one here, the quantity. In this order I want to have 10, I think, and notice the minimum quantity is 5. That might be important for some people, so you can't just get one of these, and you probably wouldn't want to either, because as we'll see later, the setup costs for the first board are quite significant. So the more you get, the less each individual board costs if you divide it by the total price by the number of boards. The rest of the stuff here I don't change. From what I can tell, these defaults will get your board made quicker. Anything here that you change will make it a little bit slower. Like let's say you want the board to be red. If I mouse over this here, you'll see it says 2 more days than the green solder mask. So it's either going to cost more or slow things down, so I just don't bother changing anything there. So if all you wanted was just the PCB only, you would just leave it like that. And as you can see, the prices for their PCB is quite cheap. But we want the PCB assembly, which is this bit down here. So you come down and you turn the switch on. It says there's a coupon and I can get some discount or something there. this is not always here, so I'm just going to ignore that for the purposes of this video, but I think maybe I could get a few dollars off or something like that. It says free assembly for your order. I really doubt that. I don't quite know what that's about. Alright, so now we have some options for PCB assembly, and again, usually I just leave these all the same. We're only assembling one side, which makes things much cheaper, and we want 10 of them. I think here you can have the option to... Oh, what happened there? I clicked on this and nothing happened. In the past I've thought you could change it so that you, let's say you buy 10 boards but you only want 2 of them assembled. In fact, I'm sure I've done that before. But anyway, I'm going to get 10, so I'll just leave it like that. This stuff I'll just leave the same. Now, unfortunately, for this particular case, we're going to have to change this economic to standard. And the reason is that on this revision of the iomixer board, we have these RGB LEDs. And they seem to be made of a softer plastic or something that melts at a lower temperature than the rest of the stuff. And they have to be attached or mounted in a separate step, is something like that, I think, is what's happening. Because if you leave those out, then the JLCPCB will let you use the economy, whatever it was, option, which is slightly cheaper, but not much. However, I have noticed that buying those LEDs yourself and putting them on manually is a huge pain in the butt. I've done that quite a bit so far, and I don't think I want to do that anymore. So I'm going to choose standard for this one, and that gives us a lot more flexibility in which parts we can mount. In particular, I think if you want to use 0201 parts, you need to have standard, like, you know, the really, really tiny resistors and capacitors. And then down below here we have advanced options, which, to be honest, I've never seen before. They seem to be constantly updating and adding new things on this site. They're certainly not resting on their laurels by any stretch of the imagination. So I'm just going to ignore this because I don't know much about it. You can also order the stencil if you want to, you know, assemble your own boards completely. You can turn that on, and I think there's probably some more options there, but I'm not going to do that this time, so I'll just click next. And then we get to upload our BOM and pick and place files. What's this? Oh yeah, I was looking at this before too, and this I don't remember this step being here. There's nothing to do. I don't know why they've added this, but anyway, just click next. Alright, so now we add the BOM file, so we select that. Then we add, it says CPL, I think this probably stands for component placement or location, component part location, I don't know. But this is the pick and place file, so we select that. And then we click on here. And if all goes well, it should say, for this particular revision at least, it should say 29 parts detected, 29 parts confirmed. Now, at some point in the future, they may run out of a certain part sometimes, and if that happens, it will say it will say like 26 parts confirmed and 3 parts not in stock or something. So you'll be a bit stuck, I guess. You won't be able to completely assemble it here, but luckily, most of the parts that I have on this board are pretty common. I'll just mention that well, you can see that the total cost of them here. It's mostly very, very cheap for all the passives, but where is the okay, see, $37.80. That's for the MPU 6050, the IMU. This is the accelerometer and gyroscope. So that's $38-ish, and then the microcontroller itself is here. This one, $28. So this is for 10, right? And as you may notice, that's actually cheaper than the IMU. So if you know for sure that you don't really care about this IMU, you can uncheck this checkbox, and then you'll save yourself $40. I kind of need to have that on there because I'm making these boards as like a standard release kind of a thing. So I'm just going to leave that like that and click next. Then we have another page which shows us a very nice graphical view of the board in 2D and 3D with all these parts on it. Now this page used to be not quite so good. It was a bit janky, but they've really put a lot of work into it here, and it's a little bit slow to load, but I'm really quite impressed with what they've managed to do. Okay, there it is loaded, and we can zoom in here and move it around, and we can also look at it in 3D, which, let's try that. So now we can look at it like that, check that our plug's in the right place and everything. You notice that when I flip the board over, that list of parts disappears because there's nothing on the bottom, and then when we go like this now, looking at the top, the parts come back. It's pretty cool, isn't it? Yeah, so I'm quite impressed with this screen. I'll just put it back to 2D because that's a little bit easier to look at. And for the parts that have polarities, like if you were assembling your own board yourself, like your own design, at this point you might want to just check that the polarities of everything are in the right place. I've found in the past that, like I said, it was kind of janky, and so like this piece here, oh, by the way, you can click on these and it shows up in the list, or you can click on the list and it will find you that thing in the diagram. Yeah, in the past these polarities, they were backwards, but it didn't seem to matter. So I spent quite a while fixing it up so that the polarities looked correct on here, only to be emailed a few hours later by somebody at JLCPCB saying, "Are you sure? That doesn't look right." But anyway, I would say if you're setting up your own design for the first time, don't bother if the polarities are wrong, or if like this thing is 90 degrees off or something. They somehow seem to figure it out themselves, and I haven't had any problems even when it didn't look right on the screen. As it says down the bottom there, this preview is for reference only. So everything looks alright there, so we'll just go next. And then we see the final cost. So we're looking at $162 for these 10 boards. But what's really nice about that is with these LEDs on there, with that plug on there, and also with the micro USB. Now a few years ago, oh, and that button there. So this is revision 1.2. It has a little button for the bootloader when you start up. And none of those things were available just a couple of years ago. So like I say, they've really been putting a lot of work into both their like web ordering assembly service and also just this user interface for setting it all up. So the only thing that I'll need to do when this arrives is put these pin headers on. So that's really nice. Yeah, so for all that is $162 or about $16 per board. That's not including shipping yet. And if we just have a look here, we'll see setup fee, $25. And then there's a feeders loading fee, $34. So this is what I was saying about if you only order a small number of boards, you're still going to be paying that basically. So if you're ordering more, then the cost of that setup doesn't look, it's not a significant part of the overall cost. And I just noticed down here you can, if you pay another $46, you can get it a couple of days quicker. I don't think many people will be doing that. I'm certainly not going to. Wait, Future Chris here. I was just editing this video and I noticed that when I switched between economic and standard assembly options, the price of the setup fee changed by quite a bit. So I thought I'd go through this procedure again, but this time using the economic option, and I would get to this screen and just give you a side-by-side comparison of this breakdown so you can see where the cost is going in each part. Keep in mind though, the economic option does not let you assemble those RGB LEDs. You can do everything else though, just not those LEDs. But for now, I'm going to save that to the cart. Oh, what is this? Oh yeah, I don't know why they want you to, I just put other in here. And for the description, I just say, none of your business. And then we click save to cart. And then wait a moment. Come on, Starlink. There we go. Okay. So yeah, the cost of just producing the PCBs only, if you want to build these at home, it's really cheap. So that's $5. And this is the assembly with all the components, 157, total of 162. Yeah, so it's 162 for 10, so that's $16 each. But notice if I put this down to 5, half of 162 would be 81, but it's not going to be 81. It's going to be 121. It didn't go down by that much because of those setup costs at the beginning. So I'm just going to put that back to 10. And then check out, I just want to show you the shipping costs. Alright, so the default shipping cost that they've got there is $57, which is DHL Express, and I'm sure that's very nice and they'll get it to you nice and quickly, but doesn't really appeal to me very much. So I found the cheapest one I could get with this order is SF, whatever that is, Express Economy, which is $20. So all up for me this time it's going to be $182, or about $18 per board for 10. Last time I got 5 at a time, which cost sort of like more like about $24-25 each. So a little bit cheaper each for each board this time. And the reason I'm getting more this time is because there was actually a decent amount of interest in that last video that I made about this. So when your board arrives, you will of course want to flash the bootloader and the firmware onto it. So let's have a look at how we can do that. I'm just going to use this board for this demonstration. This is not one of the ones that I just ordered. I already had this one sitting around, but it is the same revision. It's 1.2. But as you can see, I did not have the RGB LEDs attached. So this was done just with the economic option. And I'm kind of kicking myself because now I have to put those on manually, which is kind of a pain in the butt. So to flash the bootloader, we first need to connect to those pins here. We have GVDO clock, and this is for the SWD interface for STM32, and that's ground. The V is 3.3 volts, okay, not 5 volts, not 5 volts, 3.3 volts, and then DO and clock is for the data in the clock. And you'll need one of these ST-Link thingamybobs, and the pins that we need to connect to on here are the 2, 4, 6, and 8, so that's DO, ground, clock, and 3.3 volts. And so I've got these plugged into my plug like that. And to make the connection, I'm just going to put a little bit of solder on each one of these pads, and on the other end of my wire I have some pins or some male terminations on this side. Not focusing for me, but I think you can see them. There we go. And I'm just going to temporarily solder them on like that. I used to, in the past, solder on something a little bit more permanently like this, but that was before I made a bootloader, so I had to do that in order to change the firmware. But now that we have a bootloader, we only need to use this thing just the once to get the bootloader on it. And once the bootloader is on it, we can use a regular micro USB to change the firmware over that connection there. It's been a while since I've done any soldering with a camera in my face. It's kind of annoying. Right, so clock is green. Let's do this like that. Clock is green. DO is purple. V is brown. And then ground. And then just double check that you've got those in the right place. And now when we plug this thing into the USB on my computer, we should expect to see just the one green LED. So this is just a power LED to show that the power is on, I guess. It doesn't really have any function, and it's not being controlled by the microcontroller. So there's no program on the microcontroller. We shouldn't expect to see any other LEDs going at this point. To flash the bootloader, I'm using Linux here, so I'll just show you that on Linux first, and I'll show you on Windows afterwards. So to do this on Linux, I've been using this utility called ST-Flash. There's various ways you could do this. Let me just space that out a bit so you can see that. So it's ST-Flash, right, and then you want the bin file that's called bootloader. So it's iomixer bootloader version 0.11 in this case, and then 0x and then 8 million. Basically just put 8 million in there. So that's the address that it needs to be flashed to. And when we flash this, it's a very small bootloader, so it only takes a second to flash, but after we do that, we should see the blue LED there flashing. So that 2 flashes every second or so means that the bootloader is has been flashed correctly. Okay, let's have a look at how you could do that on Windows. So I have it connected to my Windows computer in the same way. I just erased the bootloader that I put on there, so I've reset it back to how it would be right after it arrives from JLCPCB. So you'll notice that the that blue LED is not flashing anymore, so it's in a completely fresh state. There's a couple of tools you can use to do this. I'm just going to show you like this. Hopefully this will be high enough resolution that you can actually see what's happening. The tool that I'm going to use is called STM32 Cube Programmer. So I'm going to start that up. And this window is a little bit smaller, so I might be able to zoom in a little bit more here. There we go. And you can see it's already found the thing that's connected. It's got a serial number up there. And we want to find the file. So we click on Open File and we select that same file. And then we just click Download here. And you should see some stuff showing up here when we do that. So I'm going to click Download. And then it should say File Download Complete. Hope that was in focus enough for you to see what it was, but basically that's it. And then we look over here, we'll notice that the blue LED is not flashing yet. Seems like on Windows it doesn't reboot the program after it flashes it. It just flashes it and that's it. So to reboot it, I'm just going to power cycle it. And when we do that, we'll see that the blue LED is flashing and we can see that the bootloader is running. Okay, so now that the bootloader is flashed onto here, we can remove these connections that we soldered on for the ST-Link. But just before I do that, I want to connect with the USB and make sure that everything is okay, which I'll do like this by plugging in, whoops, there. And if you have a look on the screen in the background, I have the configurator interface, and up here this says available ports. There's nothing at the moment, but when I plug this in, we should see that we get something showing up there. And if I select that checkbox, whoops, my camera disappeared, sorry about that. If we select that checkbox, it shows up in blue and it says iomixer bootloader, and also says app not found because the main firmware has not been flashed yet. And so instead of going through to the main firmware, it just got stuck in the bootloader, and that's all we have on here at the moment. The reason I wanted to check that before I remove these pins is that there are different versions of the bootloader and the firmware. For example, in the older boards that we had, this is a V1.1, it's almost exactly the same, except you can see the crystal or the oscillator there just at the end of my fingertip is a kind of a large dark grey blacky kind of one, and on the V1.2 it's this one there, it's a silvery little bit smaller one, and it's a different frequency too. This is a 12 megahertz and the previous one was 8 megahertz, so the firmware needs to be different for that. So anyway, the way you check that is by plugging it in and checking that it shows up in the configurator interface like that. And now that I've done that, I can just turn this board over, power it down of course before you fiddle around with your soldering iron, and then I can just pull these off like that, and we don't need them. By the way, I'm sure somebody's going to tell me that I could have just done something like this and pressed this on there and flashed it like that. I did try that, of course. I tried it about 20 or 30 times and I just could not get it to work. I'm not exactly sure why. Seems like it should be alright. There's no flexibility in here, or not much anyway. But I figured that if you press hard enough, it should work, but it just didn't. And then when I soldered, it works every single time, so I've just been soldering them for now. I think in future, if I'm doing lots and lots of these, I will get some proper spring-loaded connections that I can use to just place this on there and flash it quickly. But for now, I'm just doing it the way I showed you. Okay, now that the bootloader is on there, we can use the web interface to flash the actual firmware. So plug this in again. And just double check, we've got the bootloader running with the two blue flashes, and up here we can see iomixer bootloader in blue and app not found. So we want to make it so that the app is found, and we do that on this firmware panel. Down the bottom here we've got a list of firmware files in this pull down list. Now these files will be taken from the folder that the relay server runs from, and any file that ends in .bin will show up in this list. So let me just show you the folder. So this is the folder that I'm running the relay server in, and we've got one called bootloader that I already uploaded, and then we've got this one called just iomixer, and this is the actual firmware. You can see the file size is much larger. So that's the one we want to upload now, and so I'll select that one, the not bootloader one, and I'll click flash firmware, and you can see that blue LED on here goes berserk for a while. and it writes, and then it verifies, and then we need to do a power cycle after this. And then after that we should see the actual firmware running instead of the bootloader. Alright, so that's that. It doesn't reboot or anything, so you can see the bootloader is still running with the 2 blue flashes. But when we power cycle it like this, now we'll see no blue flashes on the blue, and now we'll see this text here is showing in green, and it does not say bootloader now, it just says iomixer version whatever, and it says not activated. So what that means is that all of the cool stuff has been disabled until the firmware is activated. So you can see this one here, RGB LED indices output, has these hatched marks on it. The digital outputs and digital inputs are enabled. So if you just go to the nodes list, you can get an idea there. So these two are not hatched. These are the only inputs that will be available until the firmware has been activated. All the internal stuff, like stuff that doesn't have an output or an input to an external device, those nodes are all enabled still. It's just the more interesting advanced features, let's say. So let's just see what happens in this state if we try and upload this program. I'll click upload over here, and it will say config differs. And the reason it differs is because this node, we tried to upload it, but the firmware ignored it, and it didn't upload it as part of the program. So it's just saying that what we have here in our configuration that we tried to upload differs from what was actually uploaded. But these two digital outputs here on pin 70 and pin 40, which is the blue LED and the red LED, they are working, and this timer here is just turning them off and on once a second. So to get all these other nodes unlocked, go back to the firmware tab. At least for the time being, the contents of these panels may shift around a little bit, but as I'm making this video at the moment, it's in the firmware tab panel, and right down at the bottom here you'll see activation, unused credits. Lucky me, I have 2. You can click refresh if you bought one and this is not updated. But anyway, I have 2 there, and I just click activate, and so this does a bit of magic where it contacts the server, and it says activation succeeded. Please power cycle to complete. So we power cycle it like that. And then when we plug it in this time, it doesn't say not activated. It just says, well, it doesn't say anything extra, it just says that. And now we'll see the hatched marking has gone from my RGB LEDs node. And if I upload this time, oh, there's no RGB LEDs on here. What a dummy. Oh, what a fool. Let me just do that. I'll show you what that would have done if we had some actual RGB LEDs on there. Hold on. So this is what we should expect to see. Let's try this. All right. Sorry about that. What a fool. Yeah, but if the LEDs did exist on this other one that we were just setting up, the RGB LEDs would work. Actually, you know, one way we could test it with the one. Let's go back to the one that we just set up, and we'll use an IMU node just to make sure that that's working, because I haven't actually checked this board to see that everything's working. So we'll get an IMU pitch and roll here, and we'll make that roll, and then we'll upload, and then we'll turn the live values on so we can see them, and we'll just make sure that we're getting numbers that look about right for pitch and roll. There we go. So that, yeah, sorry about that. So the LEDs, I couldn't confirm that the activation worked with the LEDs because they're not there, but I did confirm it just with the IMU now.